When I opened my purse, I froze at the sight of a strange device inside. Sensing something was terribly wrong, I took it straight to the nearest police precinct. After examining it, an officer walked over to me, his face twisted with panic and fear, and said, "Danger, ma'am. This isn't just some random gadget." I stood there in shock, unable to believe the explanation the officer gave me. But before we start the story, please write in the comments what part of the world you are watching this from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so this channel can keep growing and bring you even more fascinating stories. The atmosphere in the bedroom was quiet and peaceful. The only sound was the soft hum of the central air conditioning wrapping around the night. The hands of the clock on the wall moved with a steady rhythm, marking exactly 3 in the morning. Zinnia was still deep in a calm, heavy sleep. Her dreams felt distant and fuzzy. However, that calm was shattered when the landline on the nightstand rang with a piercing shrillness. The ring tore through the silence of the night like a long scream, forcing her consciousness to claw its way back to the surface. Zinnia woke with a start, her heart hammering a mile a minute. She blinked, trying to gather the pieces of her soul still scattered in the dream world. Her hand fumbled in the darkness for the receiver. Who would be calling at such an ungodly hour? She thought with apprehension. Calls this late never brought good news. With a trembling hand, she lifted the receiver and brought it to her ear. Her voice sounded raspy as she greeted the person on the other end of the line. It was a man's voice, gripped by panic and haste. He said he was a neighbor of her mother, Eula, from down in the country. Without beating around the bush, he delivered the news that made Zinnia's blood run cold in her veins. He told her that her mother, Eula, had suddenly lost consciousness and was in critical condition. Zinnia's breath hitched. The image of her mother's face, elderly now and living alone back home, flooded her mind instantly. Tears welled up in her eyes. The fear of losing the person she loved most tightened her throat until she couldn't breathe. The man on the phone urged her to come immediately, as her mother's condition was worsening by the second. Zinnia dropped the receiver, which fell back into place with a dry thud. She turned to the other side of the king-sized bed and shook the body of her husband, Theron, who was sleeping with his back to her. "Theron!" She screamed his name in desperation. Theron stretched slowly and opened his eyes with a look that was slightly annoyed, yet serene. Zinnia, between sobs and with a broken voice, explained that her mother was dying and she had to go back home right now. She expected Theron to jump out of bed, get ready, and grab the car keys to drive her, like any supportive husband would. However, Theron's reaction was completely unexpected. The man sat up on the edge of the bed, rubbing his face slowly. Then he looked at Zinnia with an indecipherable expression. He didn't seem alarmed at all. Theron grabbed her shoulders and tried to calm her down with a voice that was soft but firm. He said he would love to go with her, but today was a crucial day for his career. He reminded her of the important meeting with the board of directors taking place that very afternoon. That meeting would determine the future of the company and Theron's position in it. If he didn't show up, years of effort would go down the drain, and they could lose everything. Zinnia fell silent, hearing her husband's explanation. A pang of disappointment shot through her heart. In such a critical moment, she desperately needed support, but she also knew how hard Theron worked to maintain their comfortable lifestyle. Zinnia was an accommodating wife and always tried to understand her husband's position. Reluctantly, she swallowed her pride. She said she understood and would go alone. Theron nodded, saying it was the best option. He asked her to get ready quickly while he warmed up the car and packed everything she needed for the trip so she wouldn't have to worry about a thing. Zinnia rushed to the bathroom to wash her face, which was swollen from crying. The cold water on her skin helped her think a little more clearly. Although anxiety for her mother's condition dominated her feelings, she dressed in comfortable clothes and wrapped her hair quickly but neatly. There was no time to look in the mirror. Her mind was already flying toward her mother's house in the country, hundreds of miles away from the city where she lived. She prayed internally, begging God to protect her mother until she arrived. Meanwhile, downstairs, Theron seemed busy between the kitchen and the garage. He grabbed one of Zinnia's travel bags and started packing various things. He put in a bottle of mineral water, some sandwiches, and a pack of tissues. His movements were calm and methodical, not like those of someone whose wife was suffering a tragedy. After packing the food, Theron took a small box from a hidden drawer in his study. He looked at the box for a moment with an icy expression and then slid it deep into Zinnia's bag. At the bottom, hidden under the folds of a spare jacket, he zipped the bag tight and carried it to the car. Zinnia came down the stairs in a hurry. She saw Theron standing by the car, the engine already purring softly. Theron opened the door for Zinnia and placed the bag he had prepared on the passenger seat. He looked at her with an expression that seemed full of concern. He asked her to be careful on the road, not to speed, and to let him know as soon as she arrived. Zinnia nodded. Tears welled up again. She felt guilty for having to leave her husband alone to take care of the house, but her worry for her mother was much greater. Zinnia gave Theron a kiss, asking for a blessing so her trip would go well. Theron kissed her forehead, a kiss that seemed normal, but for Zinnia, it was a source of strength. Zinnia got into the car and buckled her seatbelt. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the beating of her heart, which was still racing. Theron closed the car door and signaled for her to go. The car backed out slowly to leave their luxurious suburban driveway. When the car started to pull away from the yard, Zinnia looked in the rearview mirror. She saw Theron's figure standing on the dimly lit porch. Her husband didn't go straight back inside. He stood tall, watching as Zinnia's car drove off. From the distance, the silhouette of Theron's face was blurry. Zinnia couldn't clearly see her husband's expression, but something gave her a bad vibe. Theron pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and started typing something instead of waving goodbye as usual. Zinnia brushed off that strange sensation. She thought maybe Theron was contacting a colleague to prepare for the meeting. She had to focus on driving. The trip to her mother's town would take about 4 or 5 hours if traffic was light. At this hour, the interstate would be deserted, and she could go faster. The image of her mother's face filled her thoughts again. She hoped it wouldn't be the last time she could see her smile. With firm determination, Zinnia stepped on the gas. She launched the car through the darkness of the early morning, leaving behind her home and her husband, who slowly disappeared around a curve. Unknown to Zinnia, on the porch of the house, now silent again, Theron cracked a slight smile after sending a text message. He didn't go back inside to sleep or prepare materials for the meeting. Instead, he walked calmly to the kitchen. He brewed himself a cup of coffee and sat on the living room sofa with an expression of deep satisfaction, as if a great weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The plan he had meticulously hatched was already in motion. For him, Zinnia's departure that night wasn't a simple trip to visit a sick relative, but the beginning of an end he had been waiting for a long time. The highway stretching out before Zinnia looked like an endless black tunnel. The yellowish lights of the street lamps passed one after another overhead, creating a hypnotic rhythm of light and shadow. Being the dead of night, traffic was very scarce. There were only 1 or 2 18-wheelers moving slowly in the right lane, hauling freight between cities. Otherwise, the road was just for Zinnia. The silence in the car cabin was only broken by the sound of tires humming on asphalt and the soft gospel music Zinnia had playing on the car's audio system at low volume. She needed that calm to keep her composure. Zinnia was driving at a considerable speed. The speedometer needle held steady above the average limit. She wanted to get there as soon as possible. Every second that passed was torture for her, imagining her mother fighting death alone. However, amidst her anxiety, Zinnia started to notice something strange about her vehicle. At first, she thought it was just her imagination due to fatigue and sleepiness, but the sensation became increasingly real. The car, which normally glided smoothly, now felt a bit heavier. A fine vibration traveled up from the bottom of the car to the steering wheel she was gripping. It wasn't a normal vibration. It was different from what you feel when hitting a bump. It sounded like a low, constant hum, as if something was attached to the engine or the chassis of the car and affecting its aerodynamics. Zinnia tried to ignore it. She thought maybe the car just needed a routine checkup that Theron might have overlooked due to his busy schedule. She tried to stay focused on the road. An hour passed and Zinnia was already far from the city. The darkness on both sides of the highway was getting denser, dominated by woods and fields that couldn't be seen. Suddenly, the gas indicator on the dashboard blinked orange. Zinnia frowned. She remembered that the day before yesterday Theron had told her he had filled the tank. Did the car consume that much, or had Theron forgotten to fill it up? Zinnia slowed down. She couldn't risk running out of gas in the middle of a deserted highway like this. She saw a sign indicating a rest area with a gas station about 3 miles ahead. Zinnia decided to stop for a moment. Besides getting gas, she wanted to use the restroom and wash her face to wake up. She put on her left blinker and slowed down as the car veered into the rest area. The place looked deserted. There were only a few trucks parked with drivers sleeping inside and a sedan parked in a far corner. The neon lights of the gas station buzzed softly, surrounded by moths. The attendant looked drowsy, sitting on a bench near the pumps. After parking the car next to a pump and asking the attendant to fill it up, Zinnia leaned back in the seat. Her body felt sore. She grabbed the bag Theron had packed for her to get her wallet. As she reached into the bag, she felt a bunch of things packed quite tight. There was a water bottle, the sandwiches, and a jacket. Zinnia dug deeper to find her wallet, which she usually kept in an inner pocket of the bag, but instead of the soft leather of her wallet, her fingertips touched a cold, hard, metallic surface. Zinnia frowned. She didn't remember having anything like that in her purse. With curiosity, she moved the jacket covering the bottom of the bag aside. Hidden there was a black metal box about the size of a small brick. The object looked strange to her. It had no brand, no inscriptions, just a sturdy black box with some thin wires visible at the joints. What made Zinnia's heart suddenly race was a small indicator light on one side of the box, blinking with a faint red light. Slowly, Zinnia took the box out of the bag. It was quite heavy. She turned it over under the dome light of the car. "This ain't no power bank," she thought. Its shape was too rough to be a common electronic accessory. It wasn't an internet modem either. A feeling of unease began to creep up the back of her neck. Why had Theron put this in her bag? Was it one of Theron's work tools that had slipped in by mistake? But why was it in her travel bag? And why was that light blinking as if the device was active? Zinnia looked for a button to turn it off. She was afraid the object would drain the battery or damage other things in her bag. She found a small switch on the side. Without thinking twice, Zinnia pressed it. However, instead of turning off, the indicator light, which was previously blinking slowly in red, suddenly changed to yellow and began to blink at a faster rhythm. A soft, rhythmic beep was heard. Beep, beep. The sound was like a countdown on a digital clock. A glacial chill ran from her fingertips through her entire body. Her instinct was screaming that something was wrong, very wrong. She remembered the action movies she had watched with Theron about trackers or even something more dangerous. But this was the real world, and she was just an ordinary housewife. It was impossible for there to be an object like this in her bag. She tried to dismiss those bad thoughts, but the tremor of fear wouldn't go away. She looked at the gas station attendant who was closing her fuel cap outside the window. The outside world seemed normal, but inside this car, Zinnia felt she was holding a deadly mystery. Zinnia placed the object back on the passenger seat very carefully, as if it were made of thin, fragile glass. She grabbed her wallet with a hand shaking violently, paid the attendant for the gas without saying much, and quickly rolled up the window. She didn't go to the bathroom anymore. Her urge to urinate disappeared suddenly, replaced by a baseless but very intense terror. She looked at the black object now blinking in yellow. Her mind was a whirlwind. Should she call Theron and ask him? But a little voice inside her forbade it. The image of Theron's face on the porch, that indecipherable smile, and his decision not to go with her to see her mother. All the puzzle pieces spun in Zinnia's head. If Theron had put this object in, and it looked dangerous, then calling Theron might not be a good idea. Zinnia took a deep breath, trying to control herself. She couldn't panic. She had to find out what this object really was. Zinnia started the engine, but she didn't head back toward the highway entrance. Her instinct told her that continuing the trip with that strange object was suicide. She remembered that about 3 miles before the highway entrance, she had seen a sign indicating the nearest sheriff's precinct. Maybe that was the safest place for now. She would ask the police for help to examine the object. If it turned out to be just a harmless work tool of Theron's, she would apologize and continue her trip. But if it was something else, Zinnia didn't dare to keep thinking. With hands soaked in cold sweat, Zinnia turned the steering wheel, taking the car out of the rest area via a back exit, moving away from the highway toward a dark, lonely back road. The object on the seat next to her kept emitting its beep, 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 like a travel companion carrying a message of death. Zinnia sped through the night, no longer to save time for her mother, but to save her own life from a terrifying uncertainty. Zinnia turned the car and pulled into the precinct parking lot, which looked deserted but was well lit by floodlights. The building wasn't very big, with weathered paint and the U.S. flag waving slowly on the pole at the entrance. There was only one patrol car parked and several officers' motorcycles. Zinnia parked her car a bit far from the main entrance, driven by an instinct telling her to keep the vehicle away from the building. After turning off the engine, silence reigned again, only interrupted by the rhythmic beeping of the black box on the seat next to her, which now sounded increasingly threatening. With hands still trembling, Zinnia picked up the black box. She carried it carefully, as if carrying her own life in the palm of her hand. She got out of the car and ran toward the front desk. The cold night air chilled her bones and made strands of her hair flutter, but a cold sweat soaked her back. Inside the station, a young officer dozing in a chair behind the reception counter straightened up immediately upon seeing a woman arrive with a pale face and shallow breathing at such a lonely hour. Zinnia placed the black box on the officer's wooden counter with a stiff movement. The young officer frowned, looking at the strange object whose indicator light was blinking rapidly in yellow. Zinnia tried to speak, but her voice got stuck in her throat. She could only point at the object while stammering that she had found it in her bag and thought it was dangerous. The officer seemed confused at first and was about to touch the box. Maybe he thought it was just a normal electronic gadget that was broken or lost. But before his fingers touched the metal surface of the box, a firm, authoritative voice stopped him from behind. A middle-aged man in full uniform with a detective's badge on his belt stepped out of an inner office. It was Detective Vance, the head of the precinct, who happened to be working overtime, reviewing some files. His sharp eyes immediately fixed on the black box on the counter. His face, previously serene, tensed up in a matter of seconds. He immediately ordered the young officer to back up and step away from the counter. Detective Vance approached slowly, observing the blinking pattern of the light and the thin wires visible in the cracks of the box. Without touching it, the atmosphere in the room changed drastically, becoming oppressive. Detective Vance looked at Zinnia seriously and asked her where she had gotten that object. Zinnia explained with a trembling voice that she had found it in her bag during a trip out of town. Vance nodded slowly and grabbed his radio. He spoke in police codes that Zinnia didn't understand, but the tone of his voice was of extreme urgency. He requested the nearest EOD unit, Explosive Ordnance Disposal, to report to the location immediately. Upon hearing the word explosive, Zinnia's knees buckled. She had to grab the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing. Detective Vance led Zinnia to a long bench away from the reception counter, but still within a secure zone. He asked all officers present to clear the entrance area and lock the station doors temporarily. He explained to Zinnia, in a tone trying to be as calm as possible so she wouldn't panic, that the object she had brought wasn't the bomb itself, but a very sophisticated detonator or remote trigger. These types of devices were usually assembled by professionals, not amateurs. The veteran cop continued his explanation, which made Zinnia's blood freeze. He pointed to the blinking indicator light. According to his observations, the device was equipped with a speed sensor and an accelerometer. Its mechanism was designed to fully activate if the object moved at high speed consistently, like in a car on the interstate. The yellow light